Well, on November 22nd, 1910, Nelson Aldrich and a group of top financiers in the United States went off in seclusion and in secrecy to a small island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island. At Jekyll Island, there was a club, Jekyll Island Club. The co-owner of the club was none other than J.P. Morgan. And in fact, J.P. Morgan arranged for this facility to be used at the meeting. The Rockefellers and Vanderbilts were also members of the Jekyll Island Club. And here were the attendees. Now, you see Aldrich there. And if you watch some of our previous videos, you will recognize a few of these faces. There's Benjamin Strong. There's Paul Warburg. There's Henry Davison. There's Frank Vanderlip. Who are these men? Well, filled with Morgan and Rockefeller financiers. There's Henry Davison, senior partner at J.P. Morgan and Company. Charles D. Norton at the First National Bank of New York, which was in the Morgan orbit. Benjamin Strong, who we talked about in a previous lecture. Bankers Trust in New York. He was a partner of J.P. Morgan. Paul Warburg, who we also discussed, represented Kuhn Loeb, currently director of Wells Fargo. Frank Vanderlip was the CEO of National Citibank of New York, which today is Citibank. That was Rockefeller dominated. Nelson Aldrich, well, father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr., Republican, and head of the National Monetary Commission, and then a university economist. Altogether, these 7 men represented one quarter of the world's wealth. So just highly concentrated amount of power and wealth meeting at this island. And the meeting happened in total secrecy, so much that it's a bit amusing to read about. This was an age of muckraking journalism, and Nelson Aldrich was terrified that the press might get wind of this meeting, because if the press found out about who was at this meeting, Jekyll Island, and what they were doing, hammering out the plan for a central bank, there was no way in this era of trust busting and skepticism of the money power, there was no way that Aldrich's plan would ever succeed in the court of public opinion. And so Aldrich had to keep it very hush-hush. And so the official cover story was, oh, this duck hunting expedition. And the attendees took just super elaborate precautions on the trip there and back. They boarded a train at Hoboken, New Jersey, heading down south. It was a private railroad car in the cover of darkness. They used code names on the train. Took just, again, extra precautions, make sure reporters weren't around, so that they might be able to preserve their secrecy. They ended up staying there 10 years and hammered out their, 10 days, 10 days and hammered out their plan. By the way, in November of 2010, the Federal Reserve held a 100-year anniversary conference at Jekyll Island, Georgia. 6 years after the Jekyll Island meeting, the founder of Forbes magazine, one of the greatest business magazines in the world, the founder, B.C. Forbes, was one of the first reporters to detail the Jekyll Island meeting, including how the attendees got there. And he gave everything I just described, detailed. He looked into it. He described it as the, quote, strangest, most secret expedition in the history of American finance. The real birth of the present Federal Reserve System. Bertie Charles Forbes, 1916. And he was right. It was a very strange, very secret expedition. I think sometimes when people first hear the Jekyll Island story, it just sounds so conspiratorial, and there's a reluctance to maybe believe it because it sounds like it's from a novel. But it happened. It happened. It's a verifiable fact. all the details I just described, and it was verified later also by the attendees. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And you can understand why they wanted secrecy. The fact of the matter is, if the public had gotten wind of who was there, the Aldrich Plan wouldn't have stood a chance. And so, you know, if you wanted to achieve the establishment of a central bank, you needed some secrecy. And a bit later, Frank Vanderlip reflected on Jekyll Island and had this to say: "I enjoyed it as much as I have ever enjoyed anything else. I lived during those days on Jekyll Island at the highest picture of intellectual awareness that I have ever experienced. It was thrilling." Frank A. Vanderlip, CEO of Citibank. Well, Aldrich leaves Jekyll Island, and he has his plan now ready. And in January of 1911, a few weeks later, the National Monetary Commission releases their long-awaited report. And the report says, quote, "We have no provision for the concentration of the cash reserves of the banks and for their mobilization and use wherever needed in times of trouble. Experience has shown that the scattered cash reserves of our banks are inadequate for purposes of assistance or defense at such times." What does that mean in layman's terms or English? We need a lender of last resort. We need some sort of institution to mobilize these reserves and resources in times of panic. The system, in short, is way too decentralized. Our banks also lack adequate means available for use at any time to replenish their reserves or increase their loaning powers when necessary to meet normal or unusual demands. So that's the problem, according to Aldrich and the National Monetary Commission. What's the solution? This is the solution. They say what we need is a National Reserve Association, that would oversee regional reserve centers, and those regional reserve centers would be all throughout the country, and they would oversee the banking system. They would print a single paper currency and act as a lender of last resort. Aldrich said this about his plan: "It is not a bank, but a cooperative union of all the banks of the country." And so Aldrich submitted this plan for a National Reserve Association to Congress. This is a bill essentially for a banker-run central bank. All of the officials of the National Reserve Association were to be appointed by banking executives. Okay, no government appointees at all. This is a banker-run central bank called the National Reserve Association. Aldrich was very careful to avoid to avoid calling it a central bank, as he saw in the previous slide. This is not a bank, but a cooperative union of the banks, because that word central bank, many people still felt very uneasy about it in the United States. And nonetheless, lender of last resort, a single paper currency run by the banking industry. That is the Aldrich Plan. William Howard Taft, the Republican president, comes out and supports the plan, urges Congress to pass the Aldrich Plan. The American Bankers Association also endorses Aldrich's plan. But something bad had happened for Aldrich in November 1910, just prior to the meeting at Jekyll Island. Democrats won the congressional elections. All right, it wasn't a presidential election; it was the by-election, the congressional election, 1910. Democrats took over the House, and this stalls Aldrich's plan. Aldrich is a Republican, and now his plan, the Democrats don't like it, because from the Democrats' perspective, this is just nakedly pro-banker, right? This is a pro-banker plan. Now, they didn't know about the Jekyll Island stuff, but you didn't need to know about Jekyll Island to look at this plan and see that, if you're alarmed about the money trust, that this is not an adequate solution. And so Aldrich's plan is stalled. and he wasn't even able to introduce the bill until January 1912. And in that interval, he was lobbying and trying to get the votes necessary in order for the plan to pass, but does not succeed. This is an anti-Aldrich Plan cartoon of the time. The Coming Money Trust. The Coming Money Trust. Boy, if you thought you had a money trust before, just wait. This National Reserve Association Aldrich has devised is going to make the current money trust pale in comparison. Look at this: National Reserve Association, private syndicate, the octopus, Aldrich Plan. And what's he doing? He's got the whole systems of government: the White House, the Treasury, the U.S. Capitol, the bank, the factories, the just the ordinary home, and he's just looting the whole country and pouring all this money into what? The New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street. This is the Wall Street Plan. And in fact, a Republican, member of the House of Representatives, Charles Lindbergh, who represented Minnesota. This is not the Charles Lindbergh who flew across the Atlantic in 1927. That was his son. This is Charles Lindbergh Sr., Republican from Minnesota. And Charles Lindbergh raised the alarm about this bill. He said, quote, "The Aldrich Plan is the Wall Street Plan. It means another panic, if necessary, to intimidate the people. Aldrich, paid by the government to represent the people, proposes a plan for the trust instead." Charles Lindbergh uses his position in Congress and his influence in Congress to call for a probe of the money trust. And in 1912, the Democrats in the House, led by the House Committee, or the chair of the House Committee on Banking and Currency, his name was Arson Pujo, he was a Democrat from Louisiana, convened a special committee to investigate J.P. Morgan and the money trust more generally. This committee concluded that J.P. Morgan had secured a de facto monopoly of the New York banking system, and that there was indeed a money power, that there was indeed a money trust. Morgan was called in, scrutinized by this committee. Many famous exchanges between the committee and Morgan during this investigation. And the investigation concluded, after looking into things, they found that the officers at J.P. Morgan and Company also happened to sit on a board of directors at 112 corporations. Think about that. The officers at J.P. Morgan and Company also sat on the board of directors of 112 corporations whose market capitalization amounted to $22.5 billion, $22.5 billion. And this was in an age where the total capitalization of the New York Stock Exchange was $26.5 billion. So in short, they found that there is a money power, there is a money trust, and Morgan in particular is the most dominant power in this. This was a magazine cover critical of Morgan's control over Wall Street, over big finance. But the Pujo report didn't just pick on Morgan. They also singled out Benjamin Strong, who was one of Morgan's biggest partners. They also singled out Jacob Schiff and Paul Warburg. All of these men, they said, have created a system that doesn't work for the good of the public, but works for the benefit of an oligarchical few. Now, Morgan, when he was testifying before the committee, was in ill health. He actually passed away on March 31st, 1913. So Morgan only lived so long. And actually his friends blamed the Pujo Committee, the intensive hearings, as responsible perhaps for Morgan's death in 1913. This is a Democrat cartoon. It says, "Dem House going after the satanic money trust." The satanic money trust, chasing them around the stump of politics. Democrats defeated the Aldrich Plan in 1912. Democrats defeated the Aldrich Plan in 1912. Oh, must be over. That's all, right? Well, no, that's not all. That's not all. Aldrich Plan failed, but the basic skeleton will not. There's a presidential election in 1912. The Democrats run Woodrow Wilson. Now, Wilson just so happened to be good friends with Frank Vanderlip of Citibank, and their friendship went back many years. In fact, Wilson had friendships throughout much of Wall Street. Now, Wilson, a Democrat, campaigned against the Aldrich Plan, but he didn't really give much of an alternative to what he would like to see instead. Wilson said this during the campaign. Any institutions deriving from banking reform must be, quote, public, not private. It must be vested in the government itself so that the banks must be the instruments, not the masters of business. But, you know, what does that even mean exactly? He didn't give any precise details. The Democratic platform in 1912, the official party platform, said this: we oppose the so-called Aldrich Bill of the establishment of a central bank. We believe the people of the country will be largely freed from panics by such a systematic revision of our banking laws as will render temporary relief in localities where such relief is needed, with protection from control or domination by what is known as the money trust. So they said what we need is an institution that is not controlled or dominated by the money trust. That's the solution. Okay, we oppose the Aldrich Bill. We oppose this idea for a central bank run by bankers. The platform continued. Banks exist for the accommodation of the public and not for the control of business. All legislation on the subject of banking and currency should have for its purpose the securing of these accommodations on terms of absolute security to the public and of complete protection from the misuse of the power that wealth gives to those who possess it. That's a Democratic platform. Short on details. Short on details. Well, Wilson wins this election. He becomes president in March of 1913. Over the summer, negotiations take place in the House and in the Senate into the fall. There's the electoral map, by the way. Quite a victory for Wilson. Quite a victory for Wilson. Taft had competition there from Teddy Roosevelt. And on December 23rd, 1913, Woodrow Wilson signed into law the Federal Reserve Act. And we will take a look at that in the next part of our video. See you there.